let's start talking about cyclic steam stimulation, also known as CSS. So CSS, it's a method of thermal enhanced oil recovery in which a well which produces heavy oil from a reservoir will work as a producer, as an injector. So there will be three stages in this type of oil recovery, in which in the first stage, we will inject steam very high temperatures to the reservoir, and then through a defined period of time, and then in the second stage we'll wait for a soaking time. So this steam, which is very hot and is injected into the reservoir in the soaking phase or soaking stage, will be led to transfer its heat from the steam to the reservoir and to its fluids. So as we all know, viscosity and temperature are inverse. So at higher temperatures, viscosity will go lower. This will allow the petroleum and the fluids inside the reservoir to flow easier from the reservoir to the wellbore and then to surface, which will increase our productivity. So we already talked about the first stage, which is injection, then soaking, and then we will have a third stage, which is production. So after letting the fluids of the reservoir heat and lower their viscosity, we'll have a production stage in which fluids will start going from the wellbore to the surface and then to our production facilities, and thus the temperature inside the reservoir of its fluids will start to go down until a determined point, which we will set, which probably will be the same initial temperature which we had at the beginning, and then we'll start another stage of cyclic stimulation. So this is a big overview and a big picture of how this process works, and what we have done here is work on a way to simulate it in non-commercial simulators in order to understand better and to optimize times of stages to increase our income.
Now I'm going to talk about artificial neural networks. What is that? It's a type of machine learning that have increasingly gained importance in the oil and gas industry. Why is that? Because it's fast computational speed and its capacity of predictions in, for example, in haze or recovery. So what is that? I have an example of a graph and a dispersion of some points. If you see, if I try a linear regression model, I have the half of the points in the other side of the region, so the error will be 50% or more. But if I try a nonlinear regression model, I'm going to do a model like this. The yellow points are in the yellow regions, like the picture, and the blue points are in the blue region. And that the error is less than in the linear regression example. So, what is that? For example, I have an input. The inputs are the model and the data that I have, and I know that it will change the output. For example, in our case, the reservoir, the inputs will be the injection time and soaking time, and the output will be the prediction of the cumulative oil recovery. And in the hidden layer, all of the programmation occurs. With the weights, the interaction between the inputs and the hidden layer are the weights, and with the iterative approach that has the artificial neural network is able to compute the value of that weights in this order. For example, I start in this point. I have injection time and soaking time, And with the weights that I calculated before, I can say that the oil cumulative that I can predict is this, but the error is high. Here is the 0% of error, and here is more than 0%. So with the iterative approach, I can, with the negative gradient, that is the direction that I have to follow in order to achieve the 0% of error, I will gain this approach. The next point, another weights and another bias in order to compute another cumulative oil recovery. And I follow that path in order to get here, the minimum loss error.
Once we had calculated every one of the 42 to 15 days of injection times days of soaking and all the possibilities and all the possible scenarios, we started to do the economic evaluation in order to achieve and to find which combination was the most profitable one. So first we had how we did this economic evaluation. First, we had to know what was going to be our net revenue per barrel that the model produced. So we focused on what was the price of the day, that was $70 per barrel, and based on the research that we did, we did the transport cost, that was $2.1 per barrel, and the quality adjustment, because it's a 17 API gravity oil, so it would cost and it would have a quality adjustment that would give us a net revenue of $61.8 per barrel. So the income calculated was going to be the cumulated oil produced times the net revenue. For the outcome, we divided into parts. The first one was the OPEX. The OPEX was calculated based on another two parameters. First, how much did it cost to generate the steam, and it was calculated based on how much we had to transfer the energy to the water in order to become steam and in order to get the temperature that we simulated. And the other part was the oil lifting cost for each barrel that was produced. $17 per that barrel would cost to produce it. So this was related to OPEX, and the other part that had the outcome was the deferred production. That is the production that would not be produced due to the closing time for the injection and the soaking times for the cyclic steam stimulation. And we had an average daily production rate in coal that was 18 barrels per day. And all to know what was the cost of the deferred production, we took that rate, we took it for the time that the well was closed, and we multiplied by the net revenue. So we had at last the economic parameters to evaluate economically the project. So the evaluation period was 1 year because the number of time that the well produced was in function of the number of injection and soaking times. So we couldn't do it month by month. We decided to put a 1 year evaluation period for standard to evaluate by the same with the same function all the scenarios. And the internal rate of return was 0.19 and was the fraction and was calculated yearly. Trying to represent this in a graphic way, we have the income in the uppermost part, where was the income that was the total produced oil times the net revenue for each scenario, and the outcome that would be the sum of the OPEX and the deferred production. Once we did this, we had the following results. Having first, doing the analysis for the injection and for the soaking time separately. So for the injection days, we found that the biggest or the most time the injecting time was the biggest the oil production, the final accumulated oil production. So for the biggest oil production was for 42 days. And for the soaking times, we found the same behavior. The greater the soaking days, the greater would be the oil cumulative production. But as we can see, there is an upward behavior in the cumulative oil production in function of the injection days. And this was because of the temperature. So as we previously explained, the production, the incremental in the production of oil is associated with the higher temperatures that brings down the viscosity of the oil. So what happened here? We can see that the greater the days of injection, the greater would be the temperature. But finally, between 21, 22, 23 days, the temperature will lose this slope, will not be the rate of augmentation won't be that big, and will tend to stabilize 22, 23 days. So the more injection days would not represent the more cumulative oil production. This will result in that the production losses, the more injection days and the more soaking days, will keep the deferred production growing, and the more injection days would keep the accumulated steam mass injected also growing. But this will not be the same behavior for the cumulative oil production for the phenomenon that I explained previously. So this represents that the most profitable case will not be the one that had the biggest production, that would be 42 days, but would be by the time when the temperature rose the biggest and kept its behavior of growing, because the temperature keeps growing here, but not at the same rate that it had until that point. So for 23 days of injection and 22 days of injection, we had the biggest NPV. So we had the most profitable cases for 23 days of injection and 1 day of soaking, and the second one for 22 days of injection and 1 day of soaking. So this goes, and this does not continue the behavior that we saw, that we said that the biggest the injection days and the biggest the soaking days, the biggest the production. But in terms of the soaking days, also the biggest the soaking days, the biggest would be the deferred production. So the gain that we have for every soaking day would not overcome the loss that we had for the deferred production. That's why the soaking days, the lesser, the more profitable would be a project. And in the injection days, we could see the behavior of the temperature.